Why have a donut when you can have an entire cake to yourself? Hello and welcome. This is the exact result that you'll have by finishing this tutorial. You can just watch along and learn, or if you want to get this result, you can go to my website and get the tutorial files completely for free. Okay, so I have a brand new Blender scene open here. I'm going to hit A to select everything, X for delete, and hit enter to finish the delete. I'm going to hold shift, hit A. This lets us add an object. I'm going to hover over mesh and click on cylinder. So our cake is a cylinder, so this is a great start. At the bottom left, you can click and expand this open. I based this off of a real world cake my girlfriend got for her birthday, and I measured it out, and it's 3IN enter, so that I made the radius 3 inches, and the depth is kind of like the height in this case. So I'm going to click in here and do 5.5 IN, hit enter to make it 5.5 inches tall. And then just make sure the cap fill is set to N-gon. And using my middle mouse, I'm just going to scroll in, and I'm going to click in my middle mouse to orbit around. And yeah, this is the cake shape I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and save, hold Control, hit S, navigate to wherever you want to save that, give it a name. I hit enter and enter. I'm a big supporter of saving early and often. Okay, and so this is the cylinder selected here. I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to hold Alt, hit A. That will deselect everything. Holding Alt and Shift, I'm going to left click in between these 2 points here, and that will select this whole ring. And so this cake kind of has a little curve to it. So now I'm going to hold Control, hit B. And if you just move your mouse over, that's going to bevel that edge. And then if you put your scroll wheel, if you scroll up a few times, I'm going to go to maybe about that many. And if you pull, you can really see that we're making this curve here. It doesn't need to be that large. I think looking at the cake, it's probably something like that is going to be pretty good. And okay, so we've got that bevel going. Okay, and I'm going to end up subdividing this to give us more geometry, because sculpting needs a lot of geometry. But first, I'm going to hit numpad 1. Let me do this so you can see here. I'm going to hit numpad 1. If you don't have a numpad, follow these settings, those directions, and then you would just hit 1 to go into your front view, the normal 1 key. All right, so first I want to add some loop cuts. So I'm going to hold Control, hit R. And if you hover over here, you'll see there's a line here. If you scroll up with the middle mouse, you'll increase the cuts. I'm going to increase the cuts until these look like they're square. And so I've got 8 cuts, and that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to left click to make the cuts, and left click again to leave them in that exact same position. And I'm just going to orbit around again. Yep, it looks good. I'm going to hit numpad 1, and let's keep going. Okay, so I'm going to tab out of edit mode, and in this right panel where there's the little wrench, I'm going to click on add modifier and add subdivision surface. So if you aren't familiar, subdivision surface, it just adds more geometry. And if in the viewport here, if I click that up, it's going to just subdivide it even more and add more geometry. And that's going to be nice because, like I said, when you're sculpting, you want to have a lot of geometry to work with. But one thing you noticed here, it did curve this bottom area, and we don't want that. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit Z and click on wireframe. And I'm just going to left click and drag and get all these bottom vertices. And then I'm going to hit N to bring up my right panel. Make sure you click up into this item tab, and where it says mean crease, just drag that all the way up to 1. So now if I tab out of edit mode, if I hit Z, go back to solid, and I'm going to click with my middle mouse, you will see that we've got the basic cake shape going. Okay, and you definitely want to hold Control, hit S, and save now, because we're going to end up applying the subdivision surface, but I want you to have a point to go back to if your computer can't handle the amount of geometry we end up adding. So I'm going to put this up to 5. I have a pretty good computer, so we're going to handle it. If you don't have a great computer, you might want to try 4 or 3. You should still get pretty good results with any of those. But I'm going to go ahead and use a 5, but definitely like 4 was going to be good, and I think 3 will even be pretty good too. So just know the detail level of our sculpt will be greater the higher you can go, but it also is much more intense on your computer. So I've got it at 5. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. You see it even takes a second. And I'm going to tab into edit mode. And if you zoom in a little bit, you can see this is really dense. So if your computer really struggled, even just going between object mode and edit mode, that's a good sign that maybe you should go File, Revert, put it to a lower number, and then apply. But this is going to work for me, so I'm going to tab back out of edit mode to object mode, and I'm ready to start sculpting. Okay, so yeah, it's time to start sculpting. So I'm going to hit that number pad 1 to go into my front view, and under object mode, I'm going to click on object mode and change it to sculpt mode. You can see we have these sculpt tools up, but first let's go over to this little screwdriver wrench over here, and under texture, I'm going to click on new, and then a little bit over here you see this little checker. Let's click on that and click on open. Navigate to wherever you have the project files downloaded, go to the assets folder, and double click on this cake brush. And then now I'm going to go back to this screwdriver wrench icon. I'm going to collapse texture and open up stroke. And instead of just drawing all over to sculpt, I don't know if maybe you've seen that before, I'm going to change it from space to anchored. And that just, instead of clicking and dragging all over the place, we just click and drag from one anchored point to make our stroke. Okay, and I want to note that your zoom level will affect the size of your brush. So like for example, if I zoom out a lot, you see that my brush now relative to the cake is pretty big. And if I zoom up really close, my brush is now really small. So while we're sculpting, you should keep your zoom level the same as we go from each side, or it'll change where the lines of our layered cake are. And also if you want yours to look exactly like mine does, you should have a same zoom. So I'm going to go, I think when I was testing it out, I had about here. And again, it doesn't need to be exact, and you could always tweak the settings to make it work. But this is the distance I'm going to use. And if you right click, you can change the radius and the strength of this. I'm going to click in here and change this to 40. And under strength, I'm going to click in here and do 0.3, hit enter. I just found these numbers to look good. I'll move my mouse around, and I'm going to kind of use this line and this line to guide where I'm going to make my point. And so I'm going to put my mouse right here, and now I'm just going to left click and drag and pull out. And you can see the further I go, the more it's affecting the cake, the more it's sculpting it. So if you keep pulling out, if I go really far, you can see it started to lift the cake up. I don't want that, so I'm going to bring it in to where it doesn't lift the cake up, and then actually go back until where it just lifts it up a teeny bit and then let go. I've found that that's a pretty good a place to work with. And so that was in the front view, so now I'm going to hit numpad 3. For you, that could be 3 to go into the side view. And remember, we're not zooming in or out. And I'm going to use this as a guide to figure out where to put my mouse. I'm going to position it right here in the center of both these. I'm going to left click and drag and pull out. And same thing, I'm going to go to where it just a tiny bit drags up the cake, just a teeniest bit, maybe even go back a little bit, let go. That looks pretty good. And the fact that we didn't zoom out and the fact that we put the brush in the same spot, these lines lined up well. If your lines aren't lining up well, it probably means you zoomed in or out and aren't at the same position. Now I'm going to hold control and hit 1. So instead of front view, this is kind of the back view. So this is the one part of the cake that has not been sculpted yet. So with my mouse again right in the center, I'm going to left click and drag, bring it out, pull it to where it just maybe a terribly bit moves the cake a little bit, and then let go. And now I'm just going to use my middle mouse wheel to scroll around and see if I'm happy with the cake. So I think this looks really good. I think we're already to somewhere pretty believable. If you wanted more or less layers, that's where you could right click, and you could have, if you change your radius, that will change how many layers you have on this cake. But I'm pretty happy with this. I think this is going to look good. And the strength will be how far your sculpt is pulling these out. And I think this looks really good. I'm going to go to 7, numpad 7, just to see it from the top. So it stayed nice and symmetrical. I'm going to middle mouse wheel around. And yeah, I think that's looking really good. I'm going to go ahead, Control S to save. Okay, and I do want to sculpt the top a little bit because it looks a little weird being completely flat. it will help sell the image when we have sprinkles on it. But I'm gonna hit number pad 7. For you, that could be just number 7. And I'm gonna sculpt this a little bit. But you can already kind of see this doesn't actually have good geometry on the top. All these points are actually going into, I think, a single point in the center. And that's why things look kind of off here. But I do want to do a little bit here. So maybe right click and maybe even take the strength even lower. Maybe I'm going to go down to even 0.1, hit enter. And I'm just going to left click and drag and bring it out. And you can see, again, if the further I go, the more it affects it. But you do see the center, it really doesn't look great. So I don't want to make it so obvious. I'm going to bring my mouse in. And I'm going to maybe go about here. And you can see, like, yes, that isn't great. But we did get more definition over here. But again, I want to stress that when we add sprinkles and when we view it at a different camera angle, it becomes way less obvious. So if I middle mouse around, even like, the camera's really going to be more like here. You can even not even see the top, or you can go about here. And once there's some sprinkles to hide some of these lines, you really won't see that. So I think that's pretty good, and it's going to work for our project. So I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, and so we're done sculpting. So at the top left here where it says sculpt mode, I'm going to click on object mode. And let's start seeing this with some lighting. So I'm going to hit Z and click on material preview. This just adds in some little lighting to our scene with some world lighting. And we can kind of see a little bit how this is going to look in the end. So if you right click on it with it selected, actually I'm going to hit escape. If you see it selected already, I'm going to right click and click shade smooth. That's going to smooth it out so you can't see any of those little faces. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and middle mouse to scroll around. And yeah, I think this is already looking really good. So let's actually give it a material though. So in this furthest right panel, I'm going to click that little orb, click on new. And under base color, I just the teeniest little bit, I'm going to go between the red and the orange and just a teeny bit, give it a little bit of a hue. As you see, if you go too far, I mean, if you want to color your cake, you definitely can color it. But I just want to give it a little off-white appearance, something like that. It's just like really light tan. I think that's going to look pretty good. You can also play with how much it reflects with this roughness value. So it's like a mirror. If you go to 0, 1, it has like no reflections. 0.5 is probably kind of realistic. So I'm actually going to click in there and change it back to 0.5. That should be good. But let's start working on the base that the cake sits on. All right, so I'm going to hold shift, hit A. Under mesh, I'm going to click on circle. And I'm not going to do anything yet other than expand this out. And for vertices, I'm going to click in here and I'm going to change it to 180. I want to have more vertices. And then click under radius. So our cake's radius was 3 inches. And I don't want this to be that much bigger. So I think I'm going to go for 3.5 IN, hit enter. And if I hit 7 to my top view, you can see it barely is bigger than the cake. So maybe I want it to be a little bit bigger. So under radius, I'm going to click 4 IN, hit enter. It's tough. I kind of want something right in between those values. So I'm going to click in there again. So what did I do? Maybe 3.75 IN, hit enter. And then I'll middle mouse around. I think that's going to be better. Yeah, so that's going to look good. And we can always change that later if we decide that we want to. So right now it's really kind of empty. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit F and that will just fill that in. And now I'm going to hit E for extrude, hit Z. I'm just going to bring it up and then left click. Right now it's huge, but if you got your right panel open and you have the item tab selected, you can just click on this Z value. I'm going to type in 1 mm, hit enter, because I only want it 1 millimeter tall, and that's perfect. So I'm going to tab out of edit mode, and we have our base going. So right now the cake is obviously going right through it. So I'm going to left click on the cake, hit GZ, and I'm just going to bring it well above this base here. If I zoom in though, I'm going to zoom in and then I hold shift and I clicked in my middle mouse to pan around. We actually can use snapping to get this to sit right onto this. So I'm going to navigate around to where I can kind of see this better. And you see this little magnet, click on the magnet and then click on the box next to it and change the vertex. So this will allow us to snap to a vertex. So if you click G for move, Z to do it on the Z axis, and if you position your mouse on one of these vertex down here, and then left click, you know it's snapped exactly to that position and the cake is sitting perfectly on the base. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off. Sometimes I forget that it's on and I get confused. So I'm gonna turn it back off. Middle mouse, zoom out, shift middle mouse to pan around. And yeah, I think this is looking exactly how I want it to. I'm gonna go ahead and save. Okay, so now I'm gonna left click on that base and let's give this one a new material. I'm gonna click new. I probably should be labeling these. Type in here, I'm gonna call it base. And this one's gonna be metallic. It's actually really not metallic in real world, but they kind of made it look metallic. So I'm gonna drag that all the way up to 1 and then pull your roughness down. This just so if you go all the way to 0, it's a perfect mirror. So I don't want that, but I do want it to be really reflective. It really is reflective. That's pretty good. And then the base color, you wanna go somewhere between, yellow and red, but so somewhere in between here. It's going to look pretty good. I think something like that. You also could play with how bright it is. I may go for the full brightness, and just a little bit lower. I'll middle mouse around and see if I'm happy with that. Yeah, that looks like a pretty good color. But one thing we should do, by default, Eevee doesn't show us the best results. So if I go to the camera icon and just check ambient occlusion, that will have little shadows that will add for us. And at screen space reflections, click on that, and that actually will give us the reflections there. Half res trace, I'm gonna uncheck that so we get full res trace. I don't think our scene doesn't have refraction, so that actually we can leave that off. And then under shadows, I'm gonna click on high bit depth. And that just makes sure that we're getting the best quality out of Eevee. I'm gonna hold Alt, hit A to deselect that. And I'm just using my middle mouse around so I can see if I'm happy with this. And yeah, I think this is looking really good. Oh, I almost forgot. If I zoom in here, I'm gonna shift middle mouse to move down. You can kind of see here where these faces are. So I'm gonna left click on the base and then right click on it and click shade smooth. You can see that it smoothed that out, but it kind of ruined the top. So in this furthest right panel, you can click on this object data properties, open up normals and click auto smooth. So that will keep the top reflection correct while smoothing this edge, and that's just what we want. I'm gonna hold Alt, hit A to deselect, zoom out, and yep, it looks a lot better now. Okay, let's start adding the sprinkles. So I'm gonna hit numpad 1 to go in my front view. I'm gonna hold Shift, hit A, hover over mesh, and I am actually gonna make this with a UV sphere. Click on that. It's really huge right now, so I'm going to click on this UV sphere. I didn't measure these out, but let's click into the radius and do 2 mm, hit enter for 2 millimeters. Now it's really teeny. I'm going to hit G and X, so that's moving it just on the X-axis, and then I'm going to move it way over here and left click. And it's really small, so it's going to be hard to work with. So I'm going to hit, this is a really great short key. To the left of the 1 key is a little tilde. If you click on that and click view selected, it'll zoom you right into the object that you have selected. And so now we can edit it. Okay, so I do have it selected here, and I'm actually in the middle mouse, zoom out a little bit, get to about here, tab into edit mode. I'm gonna hit Z and click on wireframe. And I just want to left click and drag and get these top half of vertices. So I'm going to leave the bottom ones alone, and I don't want the middle one. So all the vertices, I'm going to left click and drag, just get all of these. Hit E for extrude and pull it up. Pull it up until it's the shape of a sprinkle. So that looks like about the right shape to me. And then if you look at real sprinkles, they're not this curved. You could leave this, but I'm going to hit S and then Z. And just to bring this to be more like, you didn't want to go that far, but maybe about that looks good. Left click and drag on these, hit S and Z. So I'm scaling it just on the Z axis. I'm gonna make this match the top. Left click, tab out of edit mode, hit Z and go to solid. And there you go, we have a nice little sprinkle here. You can see the faces, so let's just right click and click shade smooth. And I'm gonna middle mouse around, and actually, I lost it when I did that. Let me zoom out, and there our little sprinkle is. And we can still tweak it later if we think it doesn't look quite right, but that is a good start. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Okay, so we're kind of done messing with that as long as we're happy with it. So I'm actually going to left click on the cake here. If you don't see it, just zoom out, left click on your cake. I'm going to click that little tilde key again. So that's the key to the left of the 1 key. Hit that and click view selected. And I'm just going to zoom out and move around with my middle mouse. So now we want to use a particle system to put all these sprinkles onto the cake. So I am going to go to this little icon here, particle properties, and click on new. So this is going to add a new particle system. If you click on hair, you now will see all these little things sticking out of our cake. It's not exactly what we want, so we have to keep tweaking with the settings. Okay, so under render, I want to change render as to object. And then under this object, instance object, I'm going to click on that and click on the sphere. So now you can see we have our sprinkles added to our cake. So if I zoom in here, we can start to see how big these sprinkles are compared to our cake. And this probably is pretty close to realistic, but just know that if you do want to change the scale here, I kind of advise against dragging this, and it's probably going to be really slow for your computer if you drag it. But if you click in here and do similar values, like let me just go back to 0.05, you can see the scale. If I click in here and do 0.1, hit enter, you can see they're much larger. Let's try like a 0.75, enter. Oh, wait, it's 0.075, enter. So whatever you think looks realistic, whatever you think looks good, go ahead and go with. Let me zoom out a little bit. I think that's pretty good. Maybe 0.05 is more realistic. Let me try that again. 0.05. I don't mind the other one. I'm going to go 0.075, hit enter. I think that looks pretty good. And in most cases, your sprinkles will be the same size, but I think it will, with 3D, sometimes you have to avoid how it looks fake. So I think I might add a little randomness here. I'm going to go like 0.5. And let me just zoom in. So you can see some of these are really big and some of these are really small. I don't want to go that far, but I do want a little bit of randomness. So I'm going to click in here and do 0.2. And so there'll be a little bit of difference between the sizes. And I'm just thinking that might look a little bit better if they're not perfectly the exact same size. Okay, so let's continue tweaking these settings. We're going to click on advanced because that lets us do rotation. So I can click on rotation. And if you go ahead and open that up, we want to change the orientation axis to normal. And then for phase, I'm going to go ahead and drag this. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm going to change the phase, random phase. I'm going to put it all the way up to 2. And again, that could be slow for your computer to drag numbers. You could just type in this value so it won't struggle at all. And I do want a little bit of randomness here. So if you go too far, some of your sprinkles will kind of stick off of the cake, and you don't really want that. But I might click in here and do like a 0.2 to give it some randomness without making the sprinkles like really stick off the cake. And I'm just using my middle mouse to scroll around, and I think this is looking very believable. I think these are distributed nicely and they have nice rotation, so I think we're off to a good start here. Okay, so it's a little boring right now because everything's all the same color, so let's hit Z and go back to this material preview. And then in the outliner here at the very top right, I'm just going to click on the sphere, and since it's so small it's hard to click on. Let's give this a material. So I'm going to left click on the little guy here and click on new. So, and at the very top, if I click on shading, you can see we have our nodes down here. And if I zoom in, actually this is kind of hard. I'm going to left click on the cake and use that same tilde key I've been using and then click view selected. So that gets us to a good view, and my middle mouse around. And so now we're going to make, so for example, if I just click this base color and make it red right now, let me hold Control, hit Z to undo that. I had the cake selected, so I'm going to click on the sphere again in the outliner, and I'm going to left click on the base color and bring that down to red. So if I zoom in, you now see we do have these red sprinkles. But we want them to all be different random colors. So let's go ahead and do that. So with your mouse in the bottom section, hold Shift, hit A, and click on the search, click in the search, type in object, you'll get this object info, left click on that, and then click anywhere, and drag the random node, left click and drag, put it into base color. Nothing's really happening yet, but hold Shift, hit A, click in the search, start typing in color, and you want to click on this color ramp. If you hover right on this line, you see it lights up, left click, and it will automatically attach these. And look, it's using this random value to give these sprinkles anywhere from black all the way to white. That's not exactly what we want, but that's a good start. We want to change this linear because it's a gradient because of this linear. Change it to constant. So right now, it actually made these all black. But if I left click and drag, oops, it can be a little hard. You have to like left click on that little guy there and then left click and drag. I'm actually still struggling. Left click and drag him over. It's a little finicky. And now you can see this is actually controlling how many are black and how many are white. So we're going to start changing these colors to add in the different color sprinkles that we want. So really you can make the sprinkles any color you want. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing, but I'm just going to zoom in with my middle mouse here, shift middle mouse just to get closer on this. Like I said, it's a little finicky to get it just right. So I'm going to left click on this first one. It kind of selects it for you. And at the bottom is where you can change the color. So I'm going to left click and I'm going to bring this all the way so it's really bright. Sprinkles are usually pretty bright. And I'm going to make this a red. So that's pretty good. I'm going to hit plus, add another little guy. I'm going to left click down here, make this one an orange. And I'm going to move this over a bit. And again, keep in mind this controls how many. So there's way more reds than purples right now. There's way more purples than red right there. I'm going to move it about to here. Hit the plus again. Oops, I kind of forget that I forget where it adds it when you make the plus. I'm going to move this over and then move this one over. And I'm going to click this time. I want this one to be green. I think maybe that's a little bit of a too bright and annoying green. So I'm going to bring it down, make this one a little darker. Maybe something like that's good. Let's click over here and add the plus. Maybe that will put it where I want it to be. So what do we have? We have red, green, orange. I do want a white. Actually, I'm going to change this one to white. I'm just going to click right in the center there. Get it nice and white. And left click this one. Really, this is a little boring. You can do whatever you want. You could skip ahead. But I'm just going to keep going ahead and adding colors here. So this one's going to be a yellow. Let's see, what else do we got? I'm going to go ahead and move that one all the way to the right and hit plus, just so I can, I'm going to left click again, hit plus, just so I don't have to keep adding those in the right position. So let's see. I want a purple, so I'm going to click in here, drag it over to a purple. Maybe make this one lighter. Maybe something like that looks good. What else do we need? This one I'm going to click on. I'm going to make this one. Actually, I want to click on this one. I want to make it a blue. That looks pretty good. What do we have here? I'm actually this one. If you left click on one and then you pull it down. Actually, that didn't work. I'm gonna left click on it and then hit the minus to get rid of it. Now I'm going to select on this last yellow one. I'm going to make this one kind of a purple blue, but I'm going to make it really dark, almost like a black. So I'm going to bring it all the way down here, and that looks pretty good. So I think that's all the colors I want. If I zoom out, there's a nice distribution of different colors. So that's pretty good. But yeah, you can do that any number of colors you want. Go ahead and do. Okay, so we're done with this material now. You could change this roughness value. Again, like 0 makes it like a complete mirror. 1 makes it not reflect light at all. Some sprinkles are shiny, some are not. I'm going to leave mine at 0.5. I actually think it looks pretty good, but you can play with that value. At the very top, I'm going to click on the layout to get back into this layout view. And I'm going to left click on the cake. And then I'm going to go back to these particle settings, the little guys there. And this is where you can just control how many of these you actually want. Just know, the higher you make this number, the harder it is on your computer. So if you're already struggling, maybe just leave it right here. But I'm still doing all right. So I'm going to click in here and I'm going to change this maybe to 6,000 and hit enter and see what I think. And if you, it's a little hard to see, so I'm going to hold Alt, hit A to deselect that. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit, middle mouse around. That's pretty good. So it really just depends on how many sprinkles you want and what your computer can handle. You can, like, watch, I'm gonna type in another 0, and you can see it's gonna be really hard on my computer. But this actually is closer to the way the cake really looked in real life. Actually, I would say it had even more sprinkles, but I found that it looked fake like this. So I'm gonna go back in here and delete one of those zeros. I think 6,000 is looking pretty good, but maybe let's change it to a 9,000. See how that looks. And really, this is just, I'm gonna use my middle mouse to scroll around. This is really just your preference at this point and what your computer can handle. I'm gonna think about it for a second, but this is looking pretty good to me. I do think, I was looking at the first version I did, and I kind of liked it with even more sprinkles. So I'm gonna left click in here, make it 11,000, hit enter, see what I think about that. Middle mouse around, zoom out. Yeah, and again, really this is just personal preference. But I think this is looking pretty good. I'm gonna stick to this. Let me zoom in a little bit. The sprinkles are maybe a little bit bigger than real life, but I think it's looking good. But you can always play with this scale value and scale randomness if you want to tweak this a bit further yourself. But I think we're looking pretty good. Okay, so this really could be it, but I want to just do a little something to add just a little bit something more to the scene. So I'm going to left click on the sphere. I'm going to hit my numpad 7 to go to my top view. I'm going to hold shift hit D, and I'm just going to drag this little sprinkle all the way over here. So now if I hit numpad 1 to go to my front view, zoom in, you can see it's way too big. So I'm just zooming in and shift middle mouse to pan. It's way too big. So I'm going to hit S for scale. I'm going to drag this down until it matches the size of our other sprinkles. Now I'm going to hit R for rotate and then type in 90 and hit enter. And you can see it's going through the base here. I'm going to hit G and Z to move it up. And if I middle mouse around, oops, we're inside the cake. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So now we can use that snapping we used before. So I'm going to turn on the snapping. I'm going to hit G and Z, hover over where one of these little vertices of the base would be, and then left click. So now we know this is sitting perfectly onto the base. And I am going to click the magnet. And actually, I was going to say you could do this with a particle system, but there is an issue with it going through the base that I don't want to deal with in this tutorial. So I'm just going to show you just a real quick way. I'm going to hit 7 in my top view, shift, zoom out a little bit. We know exactly that this is sitting right here. And in the top view, we're just moving it. We're not moving it vertically. So we can just start doing hold shift hit D to duplicate. And I'm just going to drag them. I'm just going to start holding shift hit D, move it, left click, shift D. I'm just going to move these all over my cake. And I'm doing it spread out because this is in the same rotation. And it will look really obvious if I put it right next to each other if they all have the same rotation. So I'm just going to start by putting these in different positions without rotating them. So I'm just going to do a lot of these. I think that's probably pretty good. So I'm going to hit shift, hold shift, hit D, move it over. I'm going to hit R for rotate. I'm going to rotate so now it's in a different direction. And again, I'm just going to repeat. So they even can be close to each other. It's not a problem. You just don't want too many that look exactly the same right next to each other. And I'm just going to do this. And some of them I even have like overlapping with the cake. I'm just going to do this until I have a nice little distribution of these. And again, I'm just holding shift hit D, left click, or holding shift hit D, moving over, and then left clicking. Just going to place these all over our cake. It's pretty good. Hold shift hit D, bring it here. R for rotate, make this one a different direction, and then just repeat the process. And just do this until you have enough sprinkles. I just, the cake I had so many sprinkles that there were just all of these sprinkles on the base. And so I'm just trying to recreate that because this was in the real world, the cake I had, this is how it looked. It just had all these sprinkles that were all over the place. You could take this even further and add little bits of cake that have fallen off. That would be really cool and help sell your scene. But I think that's probably enough. I'm going to use my middle mouse, scroll around, zoom out, and it just adds a little something. It's like, all these sprinkles have fallen off. It'd probably be a little bit more realistic if I hit 7 in my top view. If I hit shift D, and if I did have like more of them close to the cake, because they probably would fall off closer to the cake rather than like being really far away. R to rotate, move this one around. I'm just gonna add a decent amount that are like right at the bottom of the cake, because there probably would be more there. And I'm focusing a little more on this side because the camera angle is gonna focus on, the camera angle is gonna be for all this. So I'm just gonna focus on this area. Now I'm gonna middle mouse around. I think that's looking really nice. I'm gonna zoom out. It's just a little something, but it does help sell the scene and make it look a little bit more realistic. I'm gonna hold Alt, hit A just to deselect that last one. So I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so and as of right now, we still are using these. So if I hit Z, you see we have the material preview. I'm gonna click on rendered because we wanna actually start focusing on rendering this now. And it's dark because we don't have any lighting in our scene really. So I'm gonna click on this world tab, and to the right of color, I'm gonna click that little dot and click that dot and go to environment texture, then click on open, navigate to the assets folder that you downloaded from my website, and double click on this artist workshop. So now this is just going to add lines. You do see it in the background, but we're going to make sure we don't see it in our render. But if I middle mouse around, you can see this is now, the cake is now being lit by this artist workstation scene. And HDRs are just a really nice way to get some nice different, this is darker, this is lighter. You get different little things going on in your scene really easily. So this is a great start on getting our render going. Okay, and this really could be it, but I wanted to give you guys everything you needed to make a really beautiful render. So if you go to File and then go to Append, and if you double click on Assets and double click on this Bonus Items, then double click on Collection and double click on Bonus Items. Let me just zoom out, middle mouse zooming out, just so you can see what I added. I'm gonna hold Alt, hit A to deselect everything. So this added in a table, a camera, and a circle. And so what I've done, I'm gonna hit numpad 7 in my top view and zoom out. So if I scrub on this time wheel, I'm just clicking and dragging the time wheel, you can see that the camera is rotating around this. And the way I achieved it is I added a camera and I parented that camera to the circle. And if I hit N and go to item, you can see I add keyframes at the very beginning and the very end on the rotation. And so if I hit 0 to go to my camera view and hit spacebar, you can see that our camera is following this circle while focusing right on the cake. So right here you have a really nice render going on already, but I want to take this one little step further. If you left click on the little edge here, you can select the camera. Once you have that selected, you see a little gold, you can click on this little camera icon and you can check depth of field. Well, everything's kind of out of focus, so let's expand out the depth of field. And for the focus distance, I'm going to click in here and do 0.43, hit enter. And as long as you followed along, that should be the distance for you, where just this perfect little front is in focus. If it's not, you can tweak this number until you have these front sprinkles perfectly in focus. You may like this really drastic depth of field, but I'm gonna go ahead and change this value to 15 and hit enter. I think that is the right kind of balance between blurring the background while keeping the cake fully in focus. But again, you can completely play around with that value on your own and see what you like. Okay, and now we're completely ready to render. So if you go to the little render icon here, actually no, the little printer icon, just make sure you click this little folder, navigate to wherever you're having these project files. I'm going to do a new folder. I always like to make one called renders, double click in there, maybe name it cake render, enter, and really you could just do render animation and it would render out. I'm just going to hit spacebar so you see it would go through frame by frame and render them out as PNGs into that folder. And yeah, so you'd have this really nice animation. Otherwise, you can just hit F12 and that will render out whatever specific frame you're on. Take a few seconds, I'm gonna zoom out. There's the render. I'm gonna close that. And also, just so you know, if I change the render engine to cycles, this looks really pretty in cycles. I really was happy with the result I got with cycles. Just know, cycles takes a lot longer to render, so you'll probably be much more likely to only be able to get a still frame render rather than a whole animation using cycles. And that's it. Oh, and one last thing. I'm back. Let me go back to rendered. I'm gonna change this to Eevee. By default, the colors don't really have much contrast. Let me zoom in here, and if you are under this little camera icon and you go to color management and go down, right here you have look. And by default, if you click on it, it doesn't say it, but it's medium contrast. If you click on medium high contrast, that's just going to make the scene have higher contrast, and you could go all the way to very high contrast. I think that's probably a bit too far. I would stick to high contrast or medium high contrast. I think I am going to go with high contrast, and that will just punch up your colors a little bit. If that's too far for you, like I said, you go to medium high contrast. And let me just show you this in cycles real quick. It just adds that little extra contrast and just pushes the scene a little bit further. So now we are completely done. Thanks for watching. I hope that you found this tutorial useful. Please go ahead and like and subscribe. It is the #1 thing that motivates me to keep making new tutorials. Also, if you do make this tutorial and you tweak it and you add to it, I would love to see your results. So feel free to post them here.